The inability to set boundaries always doesn't look like a problem until anxiety shows up, until the body starts to speak through fatigue, tension, or even somatic symptoms, until you are emotionally drained, stuck in roles or even relationships that consume your time, your energy, and peace of mind. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Katia Batista, and as psychiatrist, I see it often. People who stay in environments that harm them simply because they feel guilty saying no. But setting boundaries is not selfish. It's a form of emotional self-protection. It's mental health care. In this video, I'll explore why setting limits is so hard and how reclaiming this space is a vital act of self respect and psychological resilience. Before we go further, let's define what I mean by boundaries. In psychiatry, boundaries refer to the invisible lines that help us protect our emotional, mental, and sometimes physical well being. They are not walls, they are guidelines we set to preserve our sense of self and to regulate how much of ourselves we give to others. Boundaries can be emotional, like not taking responsibility for others' feelings. They can be physical, like choosing who can touch us. They can be mental, like deciding which belief or opinions we accept. And they can be time related, choosing how much time we dedicate to work, people, or rest. Why is this important in psychiatry? Because we often see patients, especially those with anxiety, depression, burnout, or personality disorder, we have not learned to set or respect healthy limits. They say yes when they want to say no. They stay in draining relationships. They overextend at work. And this ongoing violation of their own boundaries leads to emotional exhaustion, low self-esteem, resentment, and sometimes clinical symptoms. This is not about blaming, it's about understanding that the absence of boundaries is a vulnerability. And as psychiatrist, I don't just treat symptoms. I explore what's the underlying cause of them. Boundary issues rarely come alone. Over time, they often manifest as chronic anxiety, emotional burnout, depression, substance use disorder, somatic symptom disorder, or relational dysfunctions. And in some cases, these boundary difficulties are not just patterns of behaviors, they are deeply rooted in personality structure. Certain personality disorders are strongly associated with boundary challenges. For instance, individuals with dependent personality disorder may struggle to assert themselves, say no, or tolerate disapproval, making them highly vulnerable to emotional exhaustions and relational imbalance. On the other hand, people with borderline personality disorder often experience intense fear of abandonment, and emotional dysregulation, leading to inconsistent or blurred boundaries. Meanwhile, those with narcissistic or antisocial personality disorder may frequently violate others' limits, lacking empathy or respect for personal space. In clinical settings, I see how these patterns not only affect relationships but significantly increase vulnerability to distress, dysfunction, and long term psychiatric conditions. Let's explore what this look like. Let's take a closer look at real life scenarios. These are not just stories, they are patterns I see in psychiatric practice every day. Anna. Anna has always been the strong one in her family, the problem solver, the one everyone stands to. Even as a child, she learned to be useful was the way to be loved. Now, as an adult, she feels guilty when she rests. She say yes to everything, even when exhausted, because saying no feels like failure. She arrives at my psychiatric consultation presenting with physical fatigue, excessive anxiety, and worry about her daily events and activities. Worrying was difficult to control and unexplained body pain. The diagnosis: generalized anxiety disorder with somatic symptom disorder. Regardless the diagnosis, the truth is simple. Anna has never learned to protect her own emotional space. What is the reflection? Setting boundaries is not selfish, it's survival. Anna did believe her worth came from being available to everyone, but when you constantly override your own needs to meet others, you silently abandon yourself. Let me talk about Maria. Maria has been in a long-term relationship for over 8 years. From outside, everything looked stable, but on the inside, she was silently disappearing. At first, she adjusted to her partner's needs, his stress, his family conflicts, his moods. She became the emotional container for both of them. Slowly, she stopped expressing her opinions. Her preference didn't matter. Her voice was always too much. Her feelings too sensitive. Her partner criticized her in private and in front of others. She apologized even when she has not done anything wrong. He dismissed her emotions, controlled her time, her finances, and isolated her from friends. There was not physical violence, but the emotional disrespect was constant and deep. She believed if she just tried harder, things would get better. But guess what? They didn't. She arrived in my office after diagnosed with severe major depressive disorder. Her story is one of silent suffering, a life lived without boundaries, where her emotional safety was never protected. What is the reflection? Loving someone should never cost you your dignity. When you stay in spaces that repeatedly violate your emotional safety, you lose part of yourself. Setting limits is not rejection, is self-preservation. And George is a highly competent employee. He works in a demanding department, constantly understaffed. He shows up early, leaves late, and often works unpaid hours, covering for roles that are not even his. He skips meals, never takes breaks, and has not taken a vacation in years. Colleagues rely on him. Management praises him, but no one sees that George is exhausted and emotionally disconnected from everything outside of work. To cope, he started drinking at night, feeling empty, detached, and increasingly hopeless. In consultation, he is diagnosed with alcohol use disorder and occupational burnout. The reflection is, in this case, you are not dedicated if you destroy your health to keep a system running. Boundaries are what remind us I matter too. In relationships, whether romantic, familiar, or professional, not all boundaries are created equal. Some are negotiable, meaning they can adapt to circumstances, mutual agreement, or personal preferences. Others are non negotiable, meaning they are essential for our psychological safety, self respect, and emotional well being. Let's start with the non negotiables. These boundaries are rooted in core values and basic human rights. They include things like physical and emotional safety, mutual respect, the right to say no without guilty, autonomy over one's time, body, and personal space, the ability to express thoughts and emotions without fear of rejection, freedom from manipulation, control, or abuse, whether emotional, verbal, physical, or financial. These are not open to compromise. When non negotiable boundaries are consistently violating, the result can be devastating. Chronic stress, depression, anxiety, somatization, or even as a psychiatry, often we see the consequences of long-term boundary violations show up as clinical syndromes. On the other hand, negotiable boundaries are flexible and often reflect daily life logistics or shared responsibilities. This may include division of chores in the household, preferred ways of spending quality time, communication styles or frequency, financial roles within reason, social plans or routines. This can and should be discussed openly and adjusted based on life circumstances. What matters is that both parties feel heard and respected in the process. A boundary is not a wall, like I said, it's a bridge built with clarity and self respect. Understanding the difference between negotiables and non negotiables allows individuals to advocate for their needs without guilty and to engage in relationships that they are healthier and more balanced and more emotional sustainable. When we consistently compromise on our non-negotiables, we don't just lose control, we lose part of ourselves. When we ignore our own needs to meet others' expectations, we really lose ourselves. Failing to set boundaries may seem harmless at first, but over time, believe me, it becomes a form of self abandonment. This ongoing pattern increases our vulnerability to a wide range of psychiatric conditions that I have been mentioned through my video. People just arrive in crisis, not always because of one traumatic event, but because of years of silent accumulation, of never saying no, of tolerating disrespect, of prioritizing peace over personal well being. Setting boundaries, like I said before, is not selfish, it's emotional self preservation, a pillar of mental resilience and a vital component of preventive psychiatry. Let's remember, mental health is not only about treating symptoms, it's about learning how to protect ourselves from the situations that generate them. So, how do we begin setting healthy boundaries, especially when it feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable? Establishing boundaries is a psychological skill that can be learned and strengthened. Here are practical steps. The first thing, pay attention to emotional cues. Feeling like irritation, exhaustion, guilt often point to boundaries that are being ignored, pushed, or missing entirely. Ground yourself in your values. Healthy boundaries are rooted in your sense of self, your principles, needs, and limits. They are a form of emotional hygiene, protecting your mental space, time, and dignity. Start small but stay consistent. Begin with one area where your boundaries are often challenged. You might say no to an extra task or assert your need to time alone. Consistent builds credibility and self-trust. Be clear and kind in communication. Assertiveness is not aggression. You don't need to raise your voice or justify every decision. Healthy boundaries foster honest, respectful connections, not separation. Expect pushback, even guilt. Setting new boundaries often feels uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar, especially when others have grown used to your overextension, your yes at all cost. Resistance is normal. Sometimes it comes with criticism, emotional withdrawal, or attempts to manipulate. This is where emotional strength matters most. You are not responsible for others' discomfort with your growth. Holding a boundary may trigger tension in short term, but in long term, it protects your mental health, prevents burnout, and restores inner peace. Seek support when necessary. Whether through therapy, trusted relationships, or self reflection, you don't have to navigate this alone. Learning to set boundaries is a deeply healing process. Boundaries are not a luxury, they are an essential part of psychological self preservation. Establishing them is not about distance yourself from others, it's about staying close to your own needs, values, and emotional health. Is how you preserve your well being, protect your energy, and prevent long term psychological strain. Because when we continuously ignore our limits out of guilt, fear, or habit, we risk creating the very emotional damage we try to avoid. You have the right to protect your time, your emotional balance, your values, and your mental health. Setting limits is not selfish, is mental hygiene, is resilience, is prevention, is care. If this message resonated with you, even a little, don't leave without subscribing. Go ahead, click that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your mind matters, and your boundaries too. Thank you.